Okay, so coming up, we're going to discuss a suddenly, I don't know how suddenly, but I don't know, a suddenly tight presidential race in Florida and why Joe Biden's weakness with Hispanic voters is actually a real problem for his campaign, not just in Florida, but across the country. And the question really is, can the Democratic presidential nominee recover some of the support that he believed he had? And can he do it before November? There are only a few weeks left. But first, two stories filled with direct quotes from the president were published in the last week. And these are the kind of quotes that would have ended a campaign not so long ago. And the question today is whether they are going to matter at all. The first one, President Trump's comments on tape to Bob Woodward about the severity and gravity of the risk of coronavirus. The second were his comments conveyed to Jeffrey Goldberg by people who heard them are denigrating Americans who lost their lives in war. And so, Francesca, I'm going to you first here. Does the White House consider either of these dangerous?
Well, it's pretty obvious, Kristin, that based on the number of people that they lined up when it comes to the Atlantic story, who were there on the trips, who were in the room, to push back on that, they consider it to be really a major problem for the president if there is a thought that he denigrated veterans. The comments in that article about John McCain, he had already said things about John McCain being a loser prior to running for president, I guess in 2016 when he was beginning his campaign. So those are a little bit harder for them to push back on than the comments that were allegedly made at John Kelly's son's grave or on the trip. But when it comes to the book Rage, as you were mentioning before, he's on tape. The president is on tape saying these things, and you can listen to the recordings for yourself. And there were legitimate questions being raised about how it is that the president did 18 interviews with Bob Woodward for this book at a point when there was a raging pandemic in the country. There is some pushes on the right to put blame on Lindsey Graham, the South Carolina senator, for encouraging the president to do these interviews. But even if you believe that, Kristin, that raises real questions about how the leader of the free world, who is running for re-election right now, could have been pushed into having 18 conversations by someone outside his administration.
Oh, we could do an entire podcast about the interview strategy of Bob Woodward. I mean, I found that as a journalist to be one of the most interesting parts of listening to those tapes, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, I'm going to ask Alex, what are Democrats going to do with the Woodward tapes?
Well, I think you've already seen it. I mean, they're going to take the audio of those comments. Again, it's really important for the purposes of an ad that these aren't just comments that show up in a book or in a news article, that there's audio of them, right? Because what does that mean? That means that groups like American Bridge or Priorities USA can take that and just put it in their ads. They can play the actual audio. And you've already seen that. American Bridge yesterday and Priorities USA today releasing a bilingual ad, in fact, highlighting some of Trump's comments. And that, ultimately, if we're talking about a political bottom line, yes, the media coverage matters. I think anything that shifts the attention back to the pandemic, which, in fairness, in the last few weeks has not been quite the number one story in the political media in the way that it was over the summer. Anything that shifts it back, the narrative back to the pandemic is bad for Trump. Bob Woodward going on 60 Minutes 6 weeks before an election, still a very a show with a very large audience, that matters. But what really matters, what the bottom line really is that these audio clips can go into ads, that the campaigns, the Democrats can spend millions of dollars putting them in front of voters. And this is the biggest weakness for Trump in all of this election. It's the pandemic and the widely held perception in the public that he struggled to respond to the pandemic when it happened, that his response was insufficient for a national crisis. And that's why we see President Trump in the position that he is, in a very weak position for an incumbent seeking re-election less than 2 months before the election day.
All right, so I'm just going to throw this on the table and get your reaction here. I think, yes, all of those things that you said about what Democrats are already doing are certainly true, right? What is also true is that Fox News is covering it in a very different way. Just this morning, we have Mike Pence on, and he is talking about the president wanting to show calmness, wanting to demonstrate that he's the leader of the country, that what he said was just a reflection of him being a responsible leader. I mean, he said when President Trump took the quote unquote unprecedented step of suspending all travel from China, the president put the health of America first from day one. This was presidential leadership. I witnessed presidential leadership here. That's how the White House is talking about this. So number one, they are spinning it in a way that demonstrates that he's trying to keep everyone calm. And isn't that what a leader is supposed to do? So this idea of not panicking America, I think is a really important one that you can't overlook when you're thinking about how to message these quotes. But the second thing I would throw out there is, what diminishes in my mind the power of these quotes from an electoral and electability perspective is that the coronavirus comments came in a vehicle that many Americans, especially the ones who will probably decide this election, don't care about anymore. They can't. A large part of the American public has completely written off people such as Bob Woodward and the Washington Post and CNN. This group of Americans is simply not listening anymore to information that comes from those vehicles. And I think that matters a lot. So what am I missing there?
May I also just add, Kristin, though, that when it comes to the Lindsey Graham comment, it was actually Fox News who said that. And what I'm arguing is not about the interview strategy. I'm arguing about the strategy of the right to say that this isn't Donald Trump's fault that this happened to him. It's Lindsey Graham's fault. And the notion that President Trump that it's Lindsey Graham's fault, right? One of the biggest arguments that President Trump has made against Joe Biden is that he's not in control of his own decisions. It's progressives, it's leftists, it's all kinds of people around him. So it's an odd strategy to start pushing an idea that Donald Trump is not in charge of his decisions. Lindsey Graham and other people around him are in charge of these decisions. As it pertains to the argument itself about whether the president did or didn't do enough on the coronavirus and should have or shouldn't have caused people to panic, another argument that's going around today that I think we can't ignore is, if that's the case, then why has the president spent the summer saying that the left is going to have Antifa marching towards people's homes, that there will be protests, there will be all these demonstrations, and that you won't be safe in Joe Biden's America? There's a serious question to be asked about whether or not that is inciting panic. And that seems to be a strategy of the Trump campaign at this point.